Table 9? He's just some crusty old guy with a burned face and a military hat. Probably tells war stories to get free pie. That's what the waiter said, loud enough for the kitchen staff to laugh, but not quite loud enough to carry to the booth by the window, where the old man sat with a straight back and folded hands. He didn't flinch, didn't turn around, just adjusted the angle of his ball cap, the one with the faded Marine Corps emblem stitched into it, and kept his eyes on the doorway. On the plate before him sat a single untouched slice of apple pie. Across from him, a younger woman, mid-30s, maybe, fidgeted with her coffee and tried not to cry. She called him Dad. But to everyone else in the diner, he was a quiet fixture in an old shirt, with burn scars along his jaw and a silence that felt heavier than the jukebox home. No one knew why he'd picked that table today, or why he looked like he was waiting for something or someone. And no one expected what would happen before that slice of pie even had a chance to cool. If you believe dignity shouldn't have an expiration date, especially for those who carried our country on their back, like and subscribe. Because what happened next, no one saw coming. It was the kind of place that smelled like buttered toast and old Formica, walls the color of faded mustard, a counter lined with cracked vinyl stools, and regulars who didn't need menus. The kind of place that felt safe in its routine, where the cook knew your order before you sat down and the waitress called everyone "hon." It was also the kind of place where silence could feel loud, especially when the wrong kind of laughter spilled from the kitchen. That morning, Sergeant First Class David Rourke, retired, burned, mostly forgotten, walked into Ollie's diner like he had every Sunday since he moved to town 5 years ago. But today was different. Today he wore the dress hat. Not the usual one with the salt stains and bent brim, but the one he only touched once a year. His coat was pressed. His posture was perfect, even if his gait was slow. His left hand, the one still twisted from the fire, clutched a small leather case. He didn't speak when he entered. He just nodded once at the hostess, who was too distracted with her phone to notice the scars that made children stare and adults look away. He chose the window booth, not because he liked the view, but because that's where she said she'd meet him. His daughter, Leah, the one who'd stopped calling for a few years after the fire, but who finally returned his messages last month. She walked in late, breathless, apologizing, sliding into the booth like a stranger. He said nothing, just pushed the pie toward her and poured her a cup of coffee. At the counter, a waiter named Chase, new, cocky, trying too hard to be funny, watched with an amused tilt of the head. "Look at that. Burn guy's got a date." The cup chuckled. The dishwasher snorted. Nobody stopped him. Not even the owner, who pretended not to hear. David didn't react. He never did. What they didn't see were the ribbons inside that case. What they never asked about were the rescue photos, the citations, the years of silence that followed the operation no one would talk about. Leah asked quietly why he brought it. "To remind someone," he said. "Just not sure who yet." Chase ambled over with a crooked smile, pad in hand, and made a point to stare a moment too long. "What can I get you to? Or are we just here for the pie and pity?" That's when Leah's hand trembled. And David finally looked up. Chase didn't even flinch when the old man looked up. He was too wrapped in his own performance to notice the way the air shifted when Sergeant First Class David Rourke's eyes finally met his. Not with anger, not with arrogance, but with the kind of still, unblinking stare that made something cold tickle the back of your spine. Though Chase just smirked like he'd won something and tapped the pen against the notepad. "No, not talkers," he said with a grin. "I'll just mark you down for 2 coffees and a fresh side of awkward silence." And just like that, he was gone again, back to the kitchen where he could keep playing the funny guy, the one who made his co-workers laugh with impressions and cruel little jabs. But in the booth by the window, Leah had gone stiff, her mouth slightly open, eyes darting between her father and the place where Chase had stood, her hands gripping the napkin so tightly it looked like she might shred it in two. "Dad," she whispered. But David just took another sip of his coffee, his scarred fingers slow, deliberate, every movement rehearsed like muscle memory from years of living under scrutiny. "It's fine," he said, barely audible. "I've heard worse." And that was the part that broke something in her. Not because he was hurt, but because he wasn't. Because he had been hurt so many times before that this stupid waiter's words didn't even register as new pain. She wanted to scream, wanted to call the manager, wanted to make them feel small. But David reached across the table and touched her wrist, gently, grounding her. "Let it happen," he murmured. "The truth always walks in, even if it's late." And she didn't know what that meant. Not yet. But she held still, listening, like the room was holding its breath. The other tables kept eating. Spoons scraped across plates. Booths murmured about church services and football games. No one noticed the way David sat, back perfectly straight, like parade rest, one hand resting lightly on the leather case beside him. It wasn't big, just wide enough for a few folded documents, one faded photograph, and a medal that hadn't seen sunlight in 30 years. Leah finally asked why he brought it. "You'll see," he said. But she didn't want to wait. "Why now?" she pressed, her voice cracking. "You never bring it. You don't even talk about." "Because today's the day," he said, simply. And before she could respond, Chase was back, 2 plates in hand, both orders wrong. And instead of acknowledging the mistake, he dropped the plates a little too hard, spilling sauce near David's sleeve. "Oops," he said with a shrug. "Guess I forgot burnt toast wasn't on the menu. But hey, you look like a man who can handle a little heat." It was the laugh, his own, self-impressed, half-muttered, that triggered the chain reaction no one could have predicted. Because it wasn't just Leah who heard it this time. A couple at the next booth turned. An older man in a service cap, 3 tables over, paused with his fork halfway to his mouth. And a little boy near the window, maybe 6 years old, looked at his mom and whispered, "Why are they being mean to the soldier?" Loud enough for people to hear. Loud enough for everyone to finally notice. Chase snorted and turned to leave again. But before he could disappear, a sharp voice cut across the diner. Clear, strong, and unmistakably used to being obeyed. "Excuse me," said the man from the third booth. Early 50s, square jaw, clean shave, posture rigid. He stood slowly, placing a cloth napkin on the table with military precision. "Did I hear you mock this man's scars?" Chase blinked. "What? You heard me," the man said, stepping forward. "Did you mock the man sitting at table 9? The one who looks like he carried half this country on his back and didn't stop when it started burning?" The room froze. Forks paused midair. The manager peeked out from behind the coffee machine. "Sir," Chase stammered. "I was just what?" The man said louder now. "Just disrespecting a combat veteran in front of his daughter? Just treating someone who wore a uniform with less dignity than you give to pancakes." Leah covered her mouth. David hadn't moved, hadn't said a word. But something in his expression, just a flicker in his jaw, a soft clench of the fist, shifted like tectonic plates under the surface. The man stepped beside David's booth now, his voice lower, tighter. "Sergeant First Class Rourke," he said with a nod. "If it's you, and I think it is, you pulled my brother out of a fire team collapse in Najaf. 2004. Your unit didn't even have backup. They said you shouldn't have made it." David looked up slowly. "Did he make it?" he asked. The man's jaw tightened. "He didn't. But you did everything you could. He said your name. We've been trying to find you for 18 years. Chase took a step back. The manager stepped forward. But it was too late. The room had shifted. The weight had redistributed. A quiet murmur spread across the diner, like water seeping into the walls. The man pulled out a phone and opened a photo, an old image of 6 Marines, covered in dust and smiles. "You're in the back," he said, holding the phone out. "Same scar, same eyes. No one ever forgets the ones who stand still when the bullets fly." David nodded once. Leah stared at him like she'd never seen him before. And that's when the door opened. A police officer stepped inside. Tall, uniformed, calm, but not to arrest anyone. His eyes scanned the room and landed instantly on David. Then he removed his hat. "Sir," he said respectfully, crossing the room in 5 long strides. "I'm Officer Trent." My father served with you in Fallujah. He told me if I ever saw you, I was to shake your hand. David finally stood. Not for the officer, not for the man with the photo, but because it was time. The hush that followed was physical, heavy, reverent. Chairs creaked as more diners stood, one by one. No signal, no words, just understanding. Some placed hands on hearts. Others saluted quietly. The child by the window looked around, then stood on his chair and did the same. Chase had backed against the wall now, pale and wordless. The manager approached, breathless. Sir, I had no idea. I am so sorry. But David didn't look at him. He turned to Leah, who was already crying. Now you see, he said softly. It's not about the medal. It's about reminding them what silence protects. Then he opened the leather case. Inside, one Navy Cross, 2 citations, a black and white photo of his platoon, and the original evacuation order from an operation that was never made public. The man with the photo snapped a picture, not of the case, but of the old Marine, standing tall beside his daughter, as a room full of strangers finally recognized the truth they'd missed on sight. The manager offered to comp their meal. David refused. Instead, he left double the check in cash, folded neatly beneath the plate. Then he turned to Chase, who hadn't spoken a word since the first name was mentioned, and said just one thing. Make better jokes. The world's full of them already. And with that, he left. No grand speech. No last look. Just the quiet shuffle of boots that still remembered how to march, and a daughter who walked behind him, finally understanding why he never needed to speak to be heard. The bell on the door jingled once. Then silence. The next day, the stool where Chase usually stood behind the counter stayed empty, wiped clean, but somehow still sticky with shame that hadn't quite aired out. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew the owner had asked him to step away indefinitely, which was diner speak for what happens when the internet finds out your business allowed a war hero to be mocked in full view of 20 people and a toddler with better manners. Because someone, no one knew who, had filmed it. Just 30 seconds of silence, a whole room standing, a scarred old man opening a case and handing a folded picture to a boy with his hand over his heart, and someone had posted it online with the caption, "He didn't ask for respect, but the world gave it anyway." Within hours, the video exploded, tens of thousands of views, then millions shared by veterans groups, law enforcement unions, even one senator who tweeted, "In a country full of noise, dignity still speaks louder." And Sergeant First Class David Rourke didn't know any of this, at least not right away, because when he left the diner that day, he didn't look back, didn't check his phone, didn't bask in the sudden storm of overdue recognition. He just walked his daughter back to her car and asked if she'd like to come over for coffee, like the world hadn't just shifted beneath both of their feet. And Leah, still raw from crying, nodded like she'd been waiting years to hear that question, and she followed him home like she did when she was 5 and thought he could walk through fire, because he had, and for the first time in decades. The house didn't feel like a bunker full of ghosts, but a place where peace might live again, if only for a little while. He brewed 2 cups. No sugar. No cream. Just the way he always made it. And they sat in the kitchen without saying much, the way people do when words would only get in the way of something more important. After a while, she asked why he never told anyone. About the medal. The citations. The missions. David stirred his coffee. Because the people who needed to know already did, he said. And the ones who didn't ask, they wouldn't understand. But I should have asked, she whispered. I didn't know how to talk to you after the accident. He smiled, faint and tired. Most people don't. Then, quietly, he slid a photo across the table, one she hadn't seen before. It was him, much younger, face cleaner, eyes darker, surrounded by men who all looked too young to carry rifles, and beneath it, scrawled in pencil, "We were quiet, so others could live loud." She touched the edge of the photo like it might vanish if she breathed too hard. "I'm proud of you," she said. And he just nodded, because that was all he ever needed. But the world wasn't done talking. Not by a long shot. By the end of the week, the diner was packed, more crowded than it had been in years. Not because of the menu, not because of any promotion, but because people had started traveling just to sit where David had sat, booth by the window, table 9. They took pictures of the chair, left folded flags, challenge coins, handwritten notes. One note read, "For my father. You looked like him." Another said simply, "You reminded me how to raise my son." The owner, a wiry woman named Marla with 20 years of grease beneath her nails, didn't know what to do with all of it, until one day, she cleared the wall above the booth and mounted a simple plaque, Table 9, reserved in honor of those who served in silence. And underneath it, laminated and framed, was a black and white screenshot from the video. David, standing with his cap lowered, Leah beside him, and a little boy saluting like the moment had been branded into him. Still, David didn't return. Not right away. He went for long walks instead. Past the war memorial. Past the VA office. Sometimes, he'd stop and read the names on the stone wall like he was checking in on old friends. Sometimes, he'd pause outside the school where he used to do career day talks, back when the burns were fresher, and the kids couldn't stop staring. He didn't blame them. Kids were honest. Adults were the ones who got uncomfortable. But what changed after the diner wasn't that people stared less, it's that when they did, they nodded too. Like they knew. Like they saw. And then came the letter. Official envelope. Government seal. Return address. Department of Defense, Washington, D.C. Inside. A single page, type and direct. Mr. Rourke, this letter is to formally notify you that your actions in Operation Sparrowfall have been declassified under Section 7, Code Alpha, per executive review. Your citation for the Navy Cross will be reissued with updated records. Additionally, you are invited to speak at the National Memorial Forum on Veteran Recognition, scheduled this Veterans Day at Arlington. David read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it inside the leather case, next to the original citation that no one had seen outside command. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He just went to bed early that night and dreamed of smoke, sand, and laughter from voices long gone. When Veterans Day came, David didn't go to Arlington. He went to Ollie's. He walked in right as the sun hit the front window, casting a warm gold on the glass in the linoleum floor. He wore the dress hat again, pressed jacket, polished boots. Leah walked beside him, her arm linked in his, and the place went silent the moment the bell above the door rang. No applause. No cheers. Just respect, thick and weighty. Marla came around the counter and guided them both to table 9. "It's yours," she whispered. He nodded once and sat. Then, without ceremony, he pulled the leather case from his coat, placed it on the table, and opened it wide. Inside, the Navy Cross, the updated citation, the now famous screenshot, and a new letter, this one hand-signed by the Secretary of Defense. Around him, people watched, not out of curiosity, but reverence. A child approached with a small folded flag and placed it beside the medal without saying a word. David looked at him, nodded, and said softly, "Keep it with you. When they forget, you remind them." The boy took the words like scripture. Later that day, the diner hosted a quiet event. No media, no officials, just locals, veterans, families. And in the center, a man who'd never asked to be honored, being honored anyway. David stood only once to speak. Just long enough to say, respect doesn't belong to titles. It belongs to choices. Make the right ones, even when no one is watching. Then he sat, folded his hands, and listened to the silence he had earned. 2 months later, Sergeant First Class David Rourke passed quietly in his sleep. No pain, no hospital, just peace. Beside him, on the nightstand, was the leather case. On the floor beneath it, Leah found a folded note in her father's unmistakable handwriting. It read, "If they ask who I was, don't tell them I was brave. Tell them I was steady. That's enough." His funeral was private, as he requested. But when the town heard, the church couldn't hold them all. So they lined the streets, flags in hand, hats over hearts, salutes from children who never met him. The diner closed that day, not because of grief, but because they turned table 9 into a place of tribute. No one sat there again. A velvet rope, a photo, and one framed quote remained. He never raised his voice. But the world heard him anyway.